Okay, yeah, welcome everyone. And again, at any point, if you have a question, feel free to just ask in the chat or pause me. I'm gonna go through the intent of the workshop first and just like the general thinking about what spreadsheet sites are to me and how you learn to make them. So again, this is designed to be a beginner-friendly workshop. So if you don't know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, um, you're going to learn enough so that you can manipulate it to make like a very simple sheet site. But you definitely will be coding. The entire idea of this workshop and the concept of sheet sites is kind of like taking the content and the form of a Google Sheet, which is like a data entry form that everyone is like, I hope, familiar with, and using the fluidity of a website in terms of just like how you can customize it and present it differently, more robustly than the grid that you see that here. And kind of like really customize it to your own liking. I like to think of like websites as containers, and we're filling this up with the kind of like rigid structure that is like present in this sheet, and kind of like finding ways to translate the information. So in a way, this is like an act of translation of data. Um, Another way that I like to think about spreadsheet sites in general is that it's an act of gathering. There's the act of gathering in the data that we collect. I prompted everyone when registering to kind of share what kind of site they were interested in making and what like materials they were interested in collecting and displaying. And you can see that like this sheet site format definitely lends itself to contents that are like lists of people. As we're putting in our list of music, a lot of people share desires to like make trackers of that sort, or catalog like their reading lists. So it definitely lends itself to this kind of format of a list, a catalog, an index. And in itself, a spreadsheet can definitely like serve all those purposes alone. But when I'm interested about when thinking about the gathering aspect when a spreadsheet is translated to a website is that we have this kind of like domain. It has its own dedicated URL as opposed to the one it's like just a string of random characters that is like kind of tied to Google. So it becomes easier to access. It becomes more valid in a way. This act of like representing this information kind of like legitimizes it and also kind of brings the content that you've gathered out of the constraints of the initial spreadsheet, and kind of like balancing the way that you structure the content that you're gathering, and to think about how it's maintainable, how people can still easily like follow the format you have and figure out like a mode of translation when you're putting the data that we have here into a site is kind of like the main challenge. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second, but yeah, that's my general thoughts. If anyone else has like their own opinions or thoughts on what is interesting about a spreadsheet or why you're interested in spreadsheet sites in general, I'd love to hear it. Especially if you yourself have been already like maintaining a list or some data of some sort on a sheet for a while. Would be really interested to hear that. Oh, feel free to speak if your hand is raised and you want to share.
Hi, my name is Brian, and I maintain a database of just graphic designers. I'm a talent recruiting like kind of agent, and I've been working in Airtable, and I just can't stand the way that it looks. So I was just really curious about how do you display something like a spreadsheet that's not fun, you know, and in a different kind of way?
Yeah, for sure. The kind of like control you have over the visual structure really makes like a website powerful. And
Totally.
you can see that in some of the examples, right? That the clouds one is probably the most interesting, but is also relatively simple. And I'll be talking a bit more about each of these templates later on, but kind of an example of what you can do is this cloud tab is sourced from a Google form. So also kind of like a very rigid kind of series of inputs, but it also kind of like structures the data that we end up playing with on our spreadsheet. Um, yeah, it's just like multiple options and a drop down and just like a message that people will write. But you can see that from this kind of like very boring list of data, the symbol that people have chosen in that drop down gets turned into like the image that is displayed. When you click on it, the cloud appears with a message and it also overtakes the entire screen, which is like something that you can't really do with a spreadsheet. You kind of always have to work in the context of like all the other data that is like shown. So it gets really overwhelming to focus on one, which doesn't fit a lot of use cases. Um, Another thing that you can kind of see in this pretty playful page is that there's this set of filters um, where there was this part in the forum where people submit like their type of cloud, whether it's a question, a comment, or a wish. Doesn't it doesn't really make sense, but that's the way I decided to like build this up. And these buttons at the bottom actually like make it so that only clouds that are of the type are displayed on the screen. So yeah, that active kind of like visual translation is definitely powerful, as well as like the functional capabilities that a website can unlock is really interesting. Like, of course, you can do basic sorting and whatnot in a spreadsheet, but um, it's represented so much differently from how this like grid suggests. Yeah, thank you for sharing. For the question in the chat about like captioning, I should have enabled it. Um, Let me know if you're still having issues. Okay, yeah, so that's one example of the way that like the data in the sheet has been translated into a site. Um, oh no, I'm so sorry. Um, I've enabled always show captions. Let me know if that helps. I'm gonna pause until we have the captioning set up. Let me know if there's still any issues with captioning, but if not, we'll proceed. But I'll just show another example in the meantime of another kind of like way that information on a sheet can be translated on a website. So I share this as an example for some of the workshops promo where I made this website, it's like an archive of like Filipino cassettes out of this sheet. So this is like all the source content, or most of it. And on the sheet, it's like not very useful for my intent in which like I want people to actually just like mostly see the kind of the graphics that have been like on the J cards of each tape. Um, but this ended up being kind of like the source material for this site where I made it so that there are different viewing options. And kind of the data in each row just like refers to like the address of each of the images that I wanted to set up. And I added a bunch of filtering options based on like some of the columns I have, like year, genre, and whatnot. And from a Google Sheet, you can also generate like your own pages on the site. But yeah, this is all sourced from that Google Sheet. Um, so that's one example of what you can do. And you can definitely learn how to make a site like this just from mixing some of the templates that we have in the workshop. Just to show you that like all of these are in action, but they're kind of like intermingled. And for example, like the filtering, a very similar system is in the cloud page. And for images, you can see that in the people tab here that I requested for everyone to fill out. You're asked to copy paste the URL of an image, and that then gets displayed on this page as well if you put something in. So a lot of this, I'm definitely gonna, we won't have like time in 90 minutes to kind of go into detail about like each of the quirks of each of the templates, but all the code will be available to you in a bit. And you're definitely encouraged to kind of just like understand each page as they're presented on the site, and then maybe kind of like reverse engineer and see how it was set up in code. And we'll go to that in a minute. But yeah, that's just a bit on the form. Other things to think about are kind of like maintenance and structure and whatnot. But first, let's go to the second prompt of the kind of workshop, where I'd love to invite you all to make your own Google Sheet. If you're deriving data from an existing sheet you have or an existing list, I'd still recommend you to kind of create a new one. And I'll talk a bit about like how to structure it and why that's important. But yeah, just like go to Google Drive and start a new sheet. Right? There's the shortcut sheets.new, which I think is cool. And once you have your sheet, I would love if you would share it and kind of like put it in your spreadsheet column back in the people tab. This makes it easier for people to kind of like just kind of see the work you've been doing, or also if you need debugging help, this will definitely like kind of make it easier to see. But this is also optional if you don't want to share the sheet you're working with because you want to like work on something that might be a bit more, I don't know, personal. Feel free to like not, but yeah, just a suggestion. And I'd love if people could share in the chat, or if you want to speak up, feel free to do so, what kind of like information you're interested in gathering, just like very loosely. So here, this is like a sheet of people. It could be, and I've like made it so that I can collect like information from workshop participants, but then I could have like a list of friends and their birthdays if I wanted that. And really customize it in any way I would like. Inspiration is also a good example for if you're like keeping track of a library of resources or something. If you have a reading list or whatnot. It's also very similar in form to the kind of music tab here, where, for instance, if you want to keep track of ratings of movies or music, you can kind of see what data I've decided to input and which I've decided to display. For those who are kind of familiar with Google Forms, there's more information in the guide. I won't go too in depth in it, but then something you can also consider is that you can set up a Google form and then link it to a spreadsheet. Or Google Forms automatically also generate their own spreadsheets if you'd like to use that as a base of your data. So that's also something you could do. And while you're starting to make your Google Sheet, and when you're sharing your link to it, I'm just going to talk a bit about like what to consider. I'd recommend you start with just like a few kind of columns of data. Um, so the way each of these sheets is kind of like structured, I'm just going to zoom in so it's a bit clearer to see. Um, is that the top row of the sheet is a label of like for all of the information under it in a column, and each row is like an entry. And I know that people who have maybe made like their own personal like tracking sheets before kind of like break from this form at times, but this just makes it easy for the kind of like way that we need to extract data from this sheet to be read onto a site. So here's an example that I talked a bit in the guide, a bit about in the guide, where like people, inspiration, music, and clouds are kind of designed as tabs to be readable for the site. But you can see that that convention is not at all like followed in like the first three tabs with like the flower, with this like ASCII art or the agenda or the guides. These won't work for a sheet site just because there needs to be kind of like some predetermined structure where the first row of your sheet are the labels for your content. We call this like metadata, where these labels kind of provide information about what kind of info will be located under everything in that column. So the way that our websites will read this is that Chia, friend, etc. are each entries, and Chia, the entry Chia, or rather this entry has a name of Chia, and this entry's intro says I love websites. And this might be a bit obvious, but yeah, just assign just saying that if you have like dividers, for example, for decades or whatnot, things won't work. Yeah, an example for that is we can go back to the cassette archive example, where here I've kind of like written out each decade over and over for each entry. There's sometimes Google Sheets where you'll see like someone maybe makes a divider for a section or whatnot, but then this wouldn't really work for what we're going to do. So this might be like a good opportunity to think about whether your data is like best for a sheet site, or if the spreadsheet you're working on can be the website that you share in itself. Because there's also like this, there's also a decent amount of customization and like power that you can have on certain sheets, and maybe that's sufficient for your use. So there's this kind of like particular way that you have to structure data for this to work. So I would very much recommend with like a simple way to a simple structure to start, or just like think about the bare minimum amount of columns you need. Another way to think about this is also there's oops, this is like a very messy way to go through a workshop, please forgive me, but let me zoom in. There's two examples here that I have for people who maybe want to work on something like a movie tracker. This movie tracker, I have like three very simple columns, like movie, rating, and status. And in status, I put whether it's like I watched it already or it's on my watch list, or maybe I'll have an entry that's like says backlog or something like that. Another completely valid way of like structuring it is instead having the third column just be like watched. And then if I watched it, I put in the date in which I did. And if I haven't, then I'll just leave it blank. But just make sure that you kind of have like a consistent pattern that you follow throughout each column. This makes it easier to kind of like process your data once you're working on it for the site. And in the chat, I see frozen pizza critiques, list of media consumed is a big one, collecting recipes. And it's very nice to see that people are interested in kind of like representing information that they've been gathering or maybe tracking themselves on their own list on your notes app or Google Keep, or maybe some people are kind of like drawing data from other social like tracking platforms like Letterboxd or Goodreads or whatnot, and just kind of like want to have a bit more control about the presentation of it, or like live or have your content like live on its own site. All super like valid desires. Which I think makes me really think about that kind of like thinking about feed sites, particularly the sites part as like an active gathering where aside from like the work you put in to gather the data, whether it's data that you gather alone or with other people, such as in this collaborative sheet, it's kind of easier again to gather with around the site. It's just like more accessible and easy to work through. Oh yeah. So a question about structure in the chat. You can definitely have a spreadsheet with like multiple tabs. For the sake of simplicity, like maybe you'll have like a maybe you have a tracker sheet. Any kind of like information that you would like to read on one site. Um, by that I mean like it's probably best to like keep information together. So if you have, say, like the cassette archive like sheet, don't separate. You can like in the future, but then maybe for the sake of this workshop, just like make sure all the information that you want to read in one web page is together in one sheet. Um, yeah. But if you want to make multiple sheet sites, probably after making your first one, like you're free to expand and use like new tabs for new sheets. And you can also like combine information from multiple tabs once you're familiar with the kind of structure that we're playing with. Like for instance, if you notice the front page of the workshop website actually kind of like takes information from each of the tabs, where there's this paragraph here that just like kind of counts the amount of entries in each page. And there's no like tab in that spreadsheet that is just like a count. But then that's definitely also something you could do because you can make tabs in a Google spreadsheet like talk to each other. But yeah, whatever structure you decide, yeah, make sure you're familiar with it, and we can start with like one sheet first, or one tab rather. I see someone mentioned a friend who has like a spreadsheet on how often they cry, which is really nice. There's an example template later on that is kind of similar, in that it's a mood tracker also that I can talk through a bit. But yeah, um, yeah, once you've made your sheet, definitely consider sharing it in the My Spreadsheet column in your people, in the people tab. And thank you for sharing. And if anyone has issues with like the spreadsheet or with like feedback or help on the best way to structure it, feel free to share. And hopefully people in the chat can help out also. But yeah, I'd again recommend just like starting out very simple. And just remember that the structure that you need to follow is that try to make it so that the top row is like the labels for all of the corresponding content in that column, and that each row is one entry. Like don't do it the other way around. And you'll see why in a bit. Okay. So the next thing, now that you have your Google Sheet, and make sure maybe you have like an entry or two written in, is that we're gonna work on the templates that we have. And the way that is like probably best to work to get the templates is to use this glitch link. So glitch is this kind of like browser-based platform that is like a code editor and also like a host. So when you click on it, you'll see an interface similar to this. All you need to do is hit remix at the top right or remix to edit. And what it will do once you do that, and it'll just like show me doing it incognito to replicate your view. Hit remix to edit or remix. I don't know why they have two buttons that say the same thing. And you should eventually like load in your own copy of it. It takes a while because the file's a bit big. But this is what that looks like. I know it looks intimidating to start, but I'll explain what this interface is like. For those who are already familiar with code or don't want to use glitch, you are also free to just like edit. To export this entire like project. You can hit tools and import, export, download project. If you'd rather like download the examples and like work on it in your own computer. To get the preview that I saw at the bottom, you'll see a preview and there's two options, open the preview pane or preview in a new window. And you can see that you actually also have your own kind of website ready. And if you'd like help with debugging, would encourage you to just copy that glitch URL you have and share it again with us on our spreadsheet. And I'm so sorry for the amount of URLs that I'm clearly making everyone, or the amount of tabs that I'm making everyone deal with. Hopefully it's a bit bearable. Yeah, remix the glitch site and get a preview of your site and copy the URL too on your people page, on your people entry. So Glitch is a bit quirky of an editor, so I'm just gonna explain a bit about what you're seeing. And again, please don't worry if this is like intimidating. I'm like not expected to know what everything here does. And also make an account if you're interested in like saving the project. Otherwise, the remix you have, if you're logged out, is as the pop-up said, it's gonna like get deleted in 5 days. So just a note if you want to save your work. But at the left side is the file directory. So what I've prepared is this series of templates that are actually like exactly what you see on the website. So the clouds page is there, inspiration, music, people. I have an extra like mood page. You may default land on the index.html of clouds. So what index.html is, it's like the default file that is loaded on any site. What is loaded when you preview the site is not in any of these folders. It's this index.html that is in the root directory of the remixed kind of like project that I gave you all. So this is what I'm seeing, index.html here, not the one in any of the folders. If you want to see what's in the folders, like the syntax and structure is like these are folders and you just kind of like slash and then write like clouds if you want to see the clouds page, for example. Glitch is a bit buggy. So if slash clouds doesn't work and it's like showing this way, you may have to add a slash at the end. So just a note on that. And apologies if that's a bit annoying, but try to just like make sure you know how to open the preview and you know how to access each folder. So for example, music, and again, make sure that you have a slash at the end. Yeah. And again, index.html is like what is loaded when I just type the name of the folder or when I'm at the root of the site, like this is the page that's loaded. But if I add like slash index.html, then it would be the same thing. And if anyone has issues with like getting the preview to work, let me know. Um, and I just like preview a new window, and glitch doesn't refresh what you see automatically. Um, and what I mean by that is, for example, there's like other files here. If I click on it, it's not like that's loaded like live here. So just to note that you kind of like have to retype the URL or refresh. Um, yeah, we'll start with working on this index.html. And I want to make sure that people are kind of comfortable making edits. And maybe this is like a very intimidating ask, especially if you've never touched like a website or know what this code means. So let me break this down a bit. So like these are files where the project is kind of composed of like three parts, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So index.html is what is like loaded by default. So that is HTML is like a language that gives us kind of like the structure and the contents of the page. And also in the HTML file, we call on these other like .js, .css files. CSS here, which is like stylesheet.css is a CSS file, is just responsible for the visuals and the styling of the web page. And JavaScript here, which is kind of like lengthy, or .js is responsible for like the functions and interactivity of the page. So the very basic like makeup of each project is that we're essentially using JavaScript to read information from the sheet and add it as new elements into the HTML for our website. And we're using CSS to style it in different ways. It's a bit tricky because each of these file formats and languages have their own kind of like structure and syntax. Like the .js file looks very different from CSS. And I can go over like the very basics of how editing each one feels. Since index.html is kind of responsible for the structure and the content that we actually see on this main page, it's probably the easiest one to edit and kind of see changes to. For example, here we see you have a title that says like my sheet site. And all of the information that gets displayed on our webpage is handled in the section of HTML within the body tag. So HTML is like comprised of things called elements. So body here is an element, header is an element, and elements are defined by these kind of tags with these like greater than, less than symbols, and you have to close those tags. So yeah, everything in the body is the content. So this might be a bit intimidating and it's not super intuitive what each thing means. So if you haven't touched like HTML before, try just like maybe editing the text inside elements and seeing what that does. So for example, maybe start by editing H1 so that it says whatever content you want to display. So I'm going to swap it and edit it so it says music instead. Can refresh and see that now it says music. Oh, I'm so sorry about the glitch issue. Let me quickly download it. And if you're okay with working on it locally, let me give you a copy. No, you don't have to have your spreadsheet light site on glitch yet. Don't worry. That's the next step. I'm just talking through, yeah, just playing around first, and making sure that people are kind of like comfortable with the kind of massive amount of files that are displayed. So I'm still explaining, like, try for index.html, just like changing like the h1 element or the title element. So this one, I don't want it to say my sheet site. I want it to say music. And again, I can refresh and I see that has changed these elements. Mhm. Is anyone having issues with editing HTML? There's also, if you want a very or a more robust guide on how to actually read this in the guide section. But I'll explain like all you need to just like know, and just like enough to show you that you kind of get a sense of like the structure and what is okay to edit. Um, Oops. If anyone is having issues with accessing glitch, I just uploaded or I sent a link in the chat that has like everything as like a compressed file. And if you unzip it, it should hopefully have like the entire project. Yeah, so at this point, hopefully you've edited the index.html file a bit. Probably just like at least the header and the title. So instead it reflects the data that you want to eventually import here. And let me talk a bit about kind of like the default template that I provided. This is reading data from the music tab in the site spreadsheet, in the workshop spreadsheet that I have provided. And there's a few extra info that I placed in. But yeah, that's where it stems from. You notice that there's like a list, there's this checkbox, and this is taken from information on the listen column and whatnot. The link should actually also work. And again, that just like takes like the link on that entry. But you'll notice that I also made a few decisions here where this example doesn't like use the rating column. So that's also something to consider. What information is on the spreadsheet that doesn't need to be displayed on the website, or how do you translate the information? And by that I mean the link column is obviously not just displayed as the text that is on there, but instead we kind of transformed it so that like the artist and the title that is listed, when you click on it, it has that information from that link column. That's another example of like what websites can provide, or that like the data that you have on the sheet doesn't have to map one to what is on the site. So let's talk about how this information is actually being displayed. And after that, I'm going to finally go to connecting the spreadsheets that you made onto this template. So we won't concern ourselves with styling yet, but what is happening here is that in my HTML body element, where all my content is kind of like rendered, and you can see here that there's some code also that is essentially saying that this needs to read code-table.js. There's this table that I have. This has like an empty table row, but if I wanted to, I can be like music and copy this and be like, so yeah, tr is a table row, th is a table header. This is not very intuitive like abbreviation, so definitely feel free to Google, just like be like HTML tr if you want a bit more info, but that's one edit I can make, but also optional. And if I refresh, you can kind of see that now there's like a heading. So let's look at the JavaScript, because you'll notice that after adding this information, it got reflected on the page, but then like, I don't know, like like these entries are not like in the code, because they're not like hard written in the HTML. What JavaScript is doing is again kind of like taking data from the spreadsheet and actually inserting more elements and more table rows onto the page. To see that happening, you can right click and kind of view inspect. It's also kind of a very intimidating view if you've never coded before, but it should be similar for whatever browser you use. You can actually kind of just like see the code that is being displayed on the page, and what goes behind it. And suddenly in the table, there's like a bunch of elements aside from the music and listen to that I have here. I mean, that's because this information is being inserted in by JavaScript. So what JavaScript is doing here is that it's adding new table rows from information on the sheet. So let's take a look at how it's doing it. And again, there's two JavaScript files, because I kind of gave two options for the code, but let's start with the code-table because that's what is in use. If you're more comfortable with what I'm talking about, I would highly recommend you just like start tweaking things to fit the data you want. And feel free to just like play around, adjust, and preview changes. That's like the best way to learn, honestly. And don't be afraid about not getting what everything means at once. This is definitely structured so that you're encouraged to like kind of break and just like take parts that you need in whatever way necessary. Like I don't believe that you need to like fully know like proper convention or anything to start getting to work on these things. But yeah, okay. So let's actually take a look at what the code is doing. So I have left some comments here. And what this code is doing is that there's this variable called spreadsheet ID and tab. And I've pasted in the ID of my spreadsheet and like the tab name. And this is again, like just the ID of the workshop spreadsheet. And I'll explain how to get your own information in a second. And what this is doing is that when the document is loaded, we use this API, which is just like this, I guess, service that translates the information in Google Sheets into a format that is readable by like our JavaScript. What it's doing is it's translating it into JSON, and it's taking this data. And again, if you go inspect and look at the console, you'll see that information that I have logged from in the JavaScript file here. So here's the 2 bits that I have logged. The first thing that you see is that the data that we have on the spreadsheet is now like read as this array of objects. And again, this is why it's important to have like the structure of your sheet fitting in a way that is like easily readable once you're like taking things from code. So we receive it as this kind of like array of each, where every entry is an object in this list. The next bit of code kind of goes over this big list of information that we have from the spreadsheet and performs a function for each entry that we go through. And this is the second console log, where console log is just like this JavaScript function that kind of like displays things in the console, but doesn't display it on the web page. It helps us debug things. You can see that it's run each time for like every entry. In that, like, this is an object and it's alone, whereas the first thing that we ran through was like a big list of all the objects. Anyway, what the next bit of code is doing is that it's creating a new HTML element where we're taking data from the spreadsheet by using the objects that we are now accessing, and then appending it or adding it to the table. And there's this like extra bit that I can explain in a second, but that's a very basic gist of it. If you want to start with what I have as an example, try to manipulate these bits. You can see like there's row link, row title, row artist. I'm reading each kind of entry as and calling it like a row. And I'm now like kind of accessing the property of each entry that is like called link, title, or artist. Maybe I don't like title dash artist structure. Do something as simple as like changing the information that I'm getting and reversing the order. And if I refresh, you can see that it's not swapped. Yeah. So while I have this information from the spreadsheet, HTML, or like what I choose to actually write into HTML, is like what ends up getting displayed. And a bit more about the structure of this. So what we're receiving is an object for each entry. So each row you have in your sheet is now an object that you can access, and the way that you access each property is by just like writing out like the label, and these labels are determined again from the first row of your very spreadsheet. And then yeah, when I type in the code that I want to get like the link of that row or the artist of each row, it's just like repeating that and adding it onto the code each time. So that's the gist of what we're doing. But you're probably more interested now in working with your sheet data. So let me get to how publishing works. So for this example, what you need to do, and the instructions are written in code, but it's a bit confusing, maybe, is you have to share your spreadsheet and make sure anyone with a link can view. It doesn't need to be editor. So make sure it's shared by hitting it at the top right. And what you want to do is get your spreadsheet ID. So the spreadsheet ID is this bit at like the address bar. It's like after the /d/ and before like /edit. It's like this big kind of chunk of like numbers and text. I'm not on my incognito. Yeah, okay. So you're gonna paste it in, and that's just like the first part of it. The second is that we also need the tab name. And what you need to do is like write like, yeah, just like verbatim your tab name. If you don't want to use your tab name, and this is probably easier, is you can also just like use the number of the tab in the order in which it's arranged. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the sixth tab in my spreadsheet. For you, you'll probably just need to write 1. So I've switched this, and it should still be getting like the music information. So that's how you get the information from your spreadsheet onto here. And of course, if your spreadsheet isn't arranged in the same way as the music tab, you won't see any information. So instead, given what you know about like about like how JavaScript is like actually getting the data from your sheet, try swapping some of these values. Like you can delete everything, or you can delete some of the things you don't need and then just like change it so that it only says like row title or something like that. And just make sure that you're able to get content from your page to display on the sheet or to display on the site. Another thing to note is that there's two ways of kind of like saying that you want to get information from a certain column. So there's dot notation, which is this. But maybe you have a spreadsheet that has like a space in the column name, and that's totally fine. You can either adjust it in the spreadsheet, or if you want to stick with a space, row dot title or like row dot whatever your like columns like header name is. You can also use this notation where you enclose the title in like quotation marks or single quotes in like the square bracket. And this should also like show the same thing. Um, is anyone having issues with connecting their spreadsheet um, to the template? Again, just to reiterate, make sure that your spreadsheet is shared so anyone with the link can view. And at the very least, when you're on your glitch site, to first confirm that you are actually getting data from your spreadsheet, like let's ignore this code or like don't even like pay attention to this. Make sure that on your console, you are actually able to see the data from your sheet. And then it's showing like something like this where you can see like each entry. Um, Let me know if anyone is still having issues with that. Um, like make sure that you see this so we can validate that the data is actually being sent to your site, even if it's not necessarily being displayed yet. Hmm. So to see the console again, make sure that on Glitch, you're previewing it in a new window and right click and inspect. And again, we're modifying the index.html in the very like root of your directory. So we're not in any folder. And right now we're using the code-table.js file. And again, what I did is I got just like the link of my Google spreadsheet here. After making it so that anyone with a link can view, I pasted it in and I wrote the name of my tab or the number of it in order. If anyone's having issues and wants like help debugging, like feel free to like just like send me your glitch site here in the chat and I can like take a look. And chances are someone else might be going through the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you for being patient with me.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, it's so hard to preview. Yeah, I'm just requesting to join for those who have shared.
Wait, what's your glitch name? Is it Gemini worms?
Oh man.
Or
Let me check.
there's a couple people on here, so
Yeah.
oh, anonymous. There we go. Accept request.
Okay. Sorry, I maybe should have not accessed the glitch from incognito, but yeah.
Where should we be looking for our content in the console? Like in the object?
Oh, yes. If you're just seeing this,
Yeah, I
you
see.
can open it. And your sheet data should be displaying.
Where's that? Where are these objects coming from? Like, they're in the body or
So what you're seeing in the console here is handled by the console log. So there's two statements in the JavaScript. They're like console log. So the first one that you should see is it should give you this like big array or list of all of your
Okay.
entries in your sheet to make sure this is working. And the second console log that is called, and you can see that this is like done multiple times, is it's now code that is going through every item in this list.
Oh, okay.
So just confirm that you can see those two views.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I went into the objects. I can see the one like I just put in like the category names and then one data entry for everything. So it is getting the information from my sheet, but it's just not showing up. So I'm thinking maybe there's an issue with my the row dot something, but it's still following the same structure as the order of the one on my sheet.
Okay. There is one bit of code that I left in that might be affecting some people. This might be related. I'm not sure. But just to explain a bit more, when we go through the list that is in the first console log, you can see that like each item in the list is like numbered. In JavaScript, we start counting from 0. So I did something here where if the index of the item that we're accessing is 0, so that would be like this entry that says party planet 1999. I'm skipping it. Feel free to delete that in your code. And if you're not seeing the first entry or like the row after your like header, that might be why. I'm seeing it now. It's like being displayed in the data and in the console. So sorry if that's annoying. That might
Yeah,
affect people.
that was why.
Okay, that's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah. Okay. Is anyone still having issues with seeing the data in the console at the very least? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I should really not have like placed that in the code, or I should have talked about that right away. Yeah. Why I left that in, there's like some tabs here that like it's not enough that like I'm using like another like description thing, but then the only thing that this code knows is that whatever's in the first row is like the header, every other row is an entry. So I kind of did that as like a lazy thing where I'm ignoring this because it's not like an actual entry that I want to show on the people page. But if you also have data that you wanted to contextualize, or if you have instructions or something, yeah, that's maybe why. But so sorry about the annoyance. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, now that if you have your code like working, or if you have your data like flowing into your page, which you can see from the console, now the next thing you can do is try just like playing with this part of the code where we're actually kind of calling on the like what data from that entry do we actually want to display. So I'm going to explain a bit about what this code is doing again. So here we're declaring this HTML element. This is like syntax that is from jQuery, just like a JavaScript library. So it's not like pure JavaScript. Maybe it was like super lazy. But inside we have like a table row, and then it ends with this table row also. And TD is the HTML element for a cell in a table. And here I have this link. I'm gonna just delete this first. And what I'm basically doing is I'm kind of like breaking from the HTML that I have, and inserting the value that I actually want for my entry. So you can see, so the syntax for that is like for each row that we're displaying, I only want the title. And to get just the title, you can do either the square bracket notation or the dot notation also works, which is like the one seen in the example. And if I refresh, you'll see that now I'm going through like each entry in my spreadsheet and displaying like the whole object. And then this is like what happens when I console log just like a row dot title. And just like an important thing about kind of like the structure of this that might give some people problems is I use this backtick to write this element. And in it, like code, we use like single quotes or quotation marks or what like to kind of like just like write things out. But this is different from how we would write like variables. And what this we're trying to do here is to create like an element that is a mix of like just elements that we want to write out on the page. And within it, like the data that we are retrieving from each entry in our spreadsheet. And we're retrieving or like we're calling on kind of like these like titles and names and points by like accessing them as like, I guess like variable values. So we're doing a bit of mixing of JavaScript and HTML. And if in like one statement you want to mix like JavaScript and like a variable, you have to kind of connect them with like pluses and then like make sure that any HTML you want or any like message you want is like in quotation marks. So this is how we distinguish like what is a variable versus like what is text that just says row title. So for example, let me just log this. And glitch like colors this so that we actually can differentiate a bit more, but this is just like a string. This is just like text. But this is a variable that is like working off the data that we are like going over from our spreadsheet. So you can see the difference. Like this row dot title is just like, it's just plain text because it's within these like quotation marks, but that this is a variable. So we're doing a mix of that here. So just like, this is like something that is unavoidable no matter how much coding you do, where you will be kind of like fighting misplaced quotation marks. And that's completely normal and I think is a core part of the process. But for example, and this is like, you can use quotation marks, by the way, for this, because quotation marks don't support like multiple lines. So I use these backticks for readability, but yeah, we have this table row element, and I have this table cell, and in each cell, I'm like inserting the row dot title like information. And if you want another cell, you can just copy this whole line. And you can see like, if it's colored like this way, it's probably right. And there should be no errors. But if it's like, if you're missing a quotation mark, things might look wonky like this. So just make sure that you're separating the variables that you're calling from like the elements in this block with like a plus, and then you're like closing and opening quotation marks properly. This is really important so that the code knows what to do. So you can do things like row artist or something. And your data should begin to display on the page. If you want to like do this even more simply, let me like feel free to just like work with one like super simple element or something like that. Or try to like change it so you get a bit familiar with everything. Like P is a paragraph element. And inside of it, I'm going to call on whatever data I want. So I got a row title. And I'm again segmenting it with these like pluses. And this is what it would display as on the page. And let me paste this bit in the chat in case anyone wants this like super simple bit. And again, like make sure that if you don't have a column called title, like you change it to whatever your spreadsheet's like headers look like. Let me know if anyone is still having issues with that. So again, this code is taking like a paragraph, that inside the paragraph is my rota title information, and it's adding it to this table element. If you see in code, like we should have, like it gets inserted into this block. If I also inspect this, I can now see that in the table, there's like a bunch of paragraphs, and these were inserted with like the jQuery code we had. Yeah. Some things that you can like begin trying are kind of like just like adding more information. So you can use the multi-line format that was provided earlier, or if where I use like the backtick like this. Just make sure that every like quotation mark that you're using in that like statement is like the same one, or else it won't work. Like you can't like mix the two. And make sure like they're also enclosed by these parentheses. Yeah. And just like try to begin like displaying all the information that you want to share. So for example, if I want another paragraph, again, I'm just gonna kind of like write out the opening and closing tags so I don't like get mixed up. And then I'm gonna break from the HTML and add like the backticks again, and then the plus, and then put the other like content that I want to call. So that's like the fundamental like way that we're displaying anything here. I'm just going to talk a bit about the second bit of code, but then if anyone still has like issues with like putting information onto the page after you've confirmed that like your data is going in, let me know. I'm super happy to spend time looking at it. Okay. So this other bit is inserting a checkbox depending on the value of one of our rows, or one of like the points of data in the row or something like that. Okay, so reading this, it's checking the value of the listened question mark part of the object, which if I see here is like false or true. if you kind of look at the code in music, if you insert like a default like Google Sheets like checkbox, that's what it does. Or that's how like the value is like displayed. We check the value of that, and then we perform this if it is equal to true. And if not, we just have a checkbox, or we just perform this. So I'm appending if row listened is equal to true is a checked checkbox, and this one is just like a plain checkbox. So a thing to know, or like a concept to think about, is HTML elements have things called attributes. And the syntax for it is like type is an attribute of the element input with the value of checkbox. So it's like equal sign, quotation mark, checkbox is the value of type. A lot of HTML elements come with like their own kind of like styling or functional bits. And if you add the attribute check to an element, it just like renders like this. So that's also something that you can mostly learn from like Googling. A lot of these are like not, again, intuitive. So I highly encourage you to like go through the examples and see how things are rendered and whatnot. But yeah, that's a basic thing. So what that means is that in addition to just like writing out like content on the page, we can actually use like information from the spreadsheet to like determine like how it's displayed, or like use it to only display certain things. Another thing that I can do is, and this is something that you also kind of just like need to play around with and look at our reference for, because it's really not super intuitive, is like there's a jQuery like function called hide. And what's doing is I apply the hide function to like, or is I apply the hide function to the element here. And let's say if I haven't listened to the song, I want to just like hide the whole thing. And I could like go back and make it so that we don't actually write it, but it's just another way of doing it, depending on how you want to interpret the data. So what this is doing is that we have another variable here where this entire like element that we wrote out, we can refer to it later on in this block of code as like the div we've declared as a variable we've declared it as. So here I'm just like calling on it again, and if this bit of information isn't true, I'm just gonna like hide this whole thing. Yeah, there's a question in the chat about separating data. That part is definitely like confusing. Yeah, so so TD is a table cell. So if you want each one to appear as its own cell, like you can just yeah, like put it, yeah, you got it, I think. Yeah, putting each one into its own table cell. Yeah. There's a question about how we show the column titles. So that's something I wrote out in the index.html file itself. So it's not in the default template. I kind of edited it in, but yeah, I added a table row in the table element. You can use table header th, or just like use table cells as well. But yeah, I just like hard coded it, so it would be the first one that shows up. And with append to, like everything, every other like row in JavaScript gets like inserted after this hard coded bit in the HTML. Yeah, and just to show like there's so many ways to do this. If you want, you can also just like append things one by one. So let's say I don't need like really a div to call my data. I'm just gonna write like I want a heading with row title inside of it. I can append this to again like the table, or if you look at the index.html, everything where the content is called the body. So I could also append it here. And then I can just copy paste this also and like change it. And how I would read this now is that for each like block of data, we're performing these two functions. So it doesn't all have to be in one block. If this is more legible for you, feel free to do so. Or if like you don't need things contained in like one large element. So if I refresh this, then now yeah, I have a header for each title and then artist and whatnot. So there's like, you can structure this in any way you would like. Whether you would want like one block to have like all the tags you would call, or do it in some other way. But yeah, make sure that you're able to just like write data in some form. If anyone has questions, feel free to also raise them, but then I can go briefly through like some of the templates and what quirks they have. Say I want to have images show. Oh, let's like go through that question because that's a common one. And this is also shown in like the guides area. Like to know the most information, I would also just like search HTML image, and you can kind of see the element that you need to insert images. And here, if we go to like our spreadsheet site workshop, people has like an image column with the addresses. And according to this guide, like the way the image tag works, oh no, it's so slow, is that I need to put like the address or the URL of an image in the attribute called source or SRC. So let's like turn this into people first. And now that I know that, I will write like image source, and then it's here that I'll kind of like cut my code, and then do like row image. And before you do this, you might want to like confirm that you're getting like info from the right tab, right? Oops. I use an equal sign instead of plus because my keyboard is lagging. Yeah, and now you can see that it's displaying all the images from that bit. But again, if you're doing this, definitely start by confirming that you have the right data flowing in. I don't think it's possible to embed an image from the Google Sheet. Like you're probably maybe referring to how you can like actually insert images on the sheet. Like these ones are like insert like image. But because we don't really have like a clean way to get the URL of images here, and also like it doesn't really follow structure, you would need to do the address. But there's other ways you can do it. For example, if in your site or in like your code, you have like images uploaded in your folder that are for like a certain title, then you could use maybe like like a row title, assuming the image in your folder is like named the same, to call in it. So there's ways that you can structure your data to support it, but yeah, for simplicity here, I just like kind of dumped in like the image address. Yeah. Like the Philippine cassette archive also works by like you don't see there's no image address here, but instead I kind of derive the image address from other bits of information here to display it on the site. So you can see that like when you're writing like information, it doesn't always need to be like text. Sometimes you just want like this info to be the image or like the color of something. Yeah. Okay. I'll briefly go through what you can expect from each template. And again, if you're still figuring the main template out, definitely start small and don't be pressured to like work off anything else. It's a lot to digest, and definitely like a lot for 90 minutes. So don't worry if you don't finish, or if you need to take time to sit with it, or if you need to like rewrite your data or start over, that's all totally valid. But I'm just going to share a bit about like what each of these code bits are. Because like these are all templates that I worked on and you can like totally play with if you'd like. So what I'm doing is I'm again kind of like typing the name of each folder, just to see the index.html in that folder. So let's go from the top to bottom, starting with the clouds. These sheets are all using info from the workshop spreadsheet. So clouds has filters. And when you click on the cloud, it like kind of displays a new like HTML element that is like taking over the whole page and shows that information, and then it goes back into the screen. This is definitely one of the more complex ones, but I hope the code is like easy enough to read. The gist of it is that, and it's also not that long. If you take a look at it, is that we're also doing the same thing. We're going over each data, running a function for each like object or for each entry in our spreadsheet. And what I did is I did a mix of like information, and I do a mix of like displaying like HTML elements and then also like using the data in the sheet as values of certain attributes or whatnot. So for example, each cloud has a type, each entry has a type, and the filtering works by hiding things that don't have like a specific value in their type attribute. So for example, if I click questions, it only shows like clouds with like the appropriate like attribute that I wrote out here. So you also don't need to just like fill in content for writing, but you can like use data from the sheet to be like kind of like selectors that you would then like filter out or like modify in some way. There's also a lot of like styling bits in this one. That you can like go through. Another cool thing that you can try to start with or explore, there's also a typo here, is that something else that I'm getting from the spreadsheet is that you can like specify the size of a cloud. And what I'm doing is I'm adding a class based on the size. I'm making it lowercase though, just so it's easier. And then in the styling, I've also set a rule where if a cloud is like has a class equal to big or something, I make it look bigger. And I don't know if it's like, yeah, you can tell that some are larger. Yeah. So that's one thing you can play with. Inspiration is good if you want to like try to like make a reading list or something. Honestly, this is not the best form for what I tried to do here, where it's like a list of references, because it's annoying that you have to click on each one. But say you're like writing movie reviews or diary entries and you only want to have like one like in display. This uses a HTML element details and summary, which is really cool. So this is not like JavaScript. This is just like an HTML element that supports the ability to like collapse and expand, which is cool. And again, I'm just like displaying the link and the text that I've left behind. So this one is also very simple and coded pretty in depth. I'm gonna skip mood first. Music is kind of similar to the default index. Where this one is sortable. So I'm just like getting bits of code from other people. And someone wrote this like JavaScript like library, I guess, called table sort, where you can make a header and then it just like sorts all the entries as long as it follows like a standard table structure. So if you see in the code, I'm just inserting everything as like a table cell, very similar to the index. For the library, I read that if you want to make it so that you don't sort like the first row and then you have to add this, or I just did that. And it's just like a lot of modifying and like honestly borrowing things. Here, the entries are also colored differently according to the vibe, and it's done similarly with like how I handled the sizing of the cloud. Where here I added like this attribute called type, and I just like put the vibe inside, and then in the styling, I read that attribute, and then if it like follows like a certain value, then I'll color it a certain way. Yeah. Then for the people, this is like the same. This just a mix of like displaying content. There's nothing like super interesting like filtering or anything. But one thing to note maybe is that this one randomizes the entries on every refresh. And I'm just doing a mix of like displaying information or like coloring information differently. And if you look in the code of people, this one looks long, but it's basically just checking if like it's actually filled in, and it's inserting something if it's filled in, and not inserting it if it's not. This is how you like prevent the undefined issue, if you run into it. And here I also just copied this function that just like shuffles info in an array. So that what I did is like JavaScript, how to shuffle array. Because I know that the results, when I'm like getting them first, like they always appear in order, right? In order of like the spreadsheet. Then I'm just like running this function on that information. So like, yeah, it's random each time. So that's also something you can consider if you like randomness in your list. Or that's something you can borrow. The mood tracker is just kind of a random one I made. The sheet for it isn't in the spreadsheet sheet, the workshop sheet, but this one is also like a Google form line. And all you do is you fill in like this and an emoji. So you can imagine that in the spreadsheet for it, it's just like one column for mood, and it's like a number, and then like an emoji if it's like filled in. And the code for it is also like pretty simple. I think the bulk of it is in the styling, where what I'm actually adding is just like, yeah, each entry. And then I'm coloring it based on the mood because I'm adding like an attribute called mood. And then here in the CSS, if the mood is equal to like 1, I'm like changing the background color, something like that. The extra bits here are like, I did this thing so that I add a header. If like this is reading entries in order because I want to see like my mood in order. That if it's like the first time that it's like sees a month, like April, it's gonna append it also to the content. But if it's already appeared, it doesn't do that. So this is another like conditional statement that handles it. If people are facing issues where the first line after the title is not showing, delete like you might see something like this, delete it. But yeah, that's a bit on each of the templates that you can play with. And I would really encourage just like getting bits of code you need. A lot of things are elaborated further in this guides page. Like I wrote it in detail. Maybe it's easier to do YouTube tutorial or something, but I like having written guides. But there's more info and resources there. But yeah, it's a lot. And if you want help debugging, I would really encourage you to kind of like revisit the people spreadsheet and insert both your source spreadsheet and the glitch site. You can just like literally copy the glitch URL if you're comfortable with it. But yeah, it's really a lot to digest. And the spreadsheet here for the workshop is definitely the best resource if you get lost or you want to retrace steps. I'm also going to provide the recording. I'm going to improve the sheet also based on like any comments or like help that people need. I'm going to try to like write a detailed section, but like definitely feel free to use like any other like resources you need. Here, like the kind of slew steps that we went through are documented. The glitch template is here. There's a bit more info about each of the templates. And here there's a bit more like philosophy thoughts on like how to maintain your spreadsheet, like whether a spreadsheet is right for you. And just feel free to share your site. And if you need help debugging, like I'm gonna look through the comments, or feel free to just message me and then I can like help point out what might not be working. But I'm really excited to see what everyone is collecting and how you decide to like represent the data. It doesn't have to be styled as like grand as any of the pages. It can be like super simple, and I think that's already really powerful. Like think of this workshop and the concepts that you took from it and like the bits of code that are all like confusing that will definitely like take a lot more time to like comb through as like just like foundation, um, a foundational resource for what it means to begin like working with data from a spreadsheet. And like you're given so many like different like resources and templates and like different like ideas and how to like represent the data, and it's definitely intimidating, so feel free to start as small as you would like or as small as you're comfortable with until you get a hang of it. And it's definitely like a muscle that you just kind of like develop. There's a lot of googling, there's a lot of like things that you can just like understand if you don't know the syntax, just like feel free to search it up. And feel free to like play with the templates and modify them as you'd like. Um, but yeah, I hope it's really too much to go through in 90 minutes. So I hope this was at least a good starting point. And let me know if you need anything else. And please share your spreadsheet and your site as it is developed. And let me know if you need any help. Um, I'm gonna leave the Excel sheet or the spreadsheet. This is not Excel. Open for a while. But yeah, when you're comfortable, do put it in. Like I'll lock it maybe after like a week or so, but feel free to like keep editing entries. There's more like I won't open it forever, just in case it gets like griefed or something. If anyone needs help again, okay, let me stop recording.